So we're going to talk about it a little bit more here. National political reporter for The Hill, Julia Manchester, joining us right now. Julia, good morning to you. You know, President Biden, he has had some pretty broad support with all voters overall. Over half of those polled approving of his response to this conflict, but it's not really helping his approval ratings, is it?
No, it isn't. And I think part of the reason for that, Adrienne, is that, foreign policy is not something that Americans tend to put on their priority list. We know that Americans, when rating a president or a government official, tend to think about those issues that are affecting them back home. For example, the economy, healthcare, crime, even immigration, the situation at the southern border. So when it comes to the situation or the war between Israel and Hamas and the situation in the Middle East, I could see this impacting President Biden's approval rating more, impacting, American public opinion more if it somehow impacted the economy with oil prices, for example. But we do know that even though this might not be helping President Biden's approval rating, we do know that Americans certainly feel strongly about this conflict, and the country is very divided.
You know, it's not a surprise at all that younger people, age 18 to 34, are more supportive of Palestinians, according to our polling data. Clearly, that's manifested on several college campuses around the country. But how important are these young voters to President Biden right now?
They're very important because one issue that President Biden has is an enthusiasm gap problem. And we know that Democratic success in elections, whether it's President Biden or another Democratic candidate, depends heavily on turnout, and young voters definitely help drive that turnout. So if there's any, feeling of maybe not wanting to vote for President Biden, being unhappy with President Biden, and younger voters, particularly millennial and Generation Z voters, deciding to stay home or write someone else in, that could definitely have an impact on the president. That being said, though, if this is the Trump versus Biden matchup, and it seems like it's on track to be going into 2024, we know that President Trump, in a way, is a galvanizing factor for a lot of Democratic voters. And given the choice between Trump or Biden, they will choose Biden. But, I know I sound like a broken record when I say this. We're a year out from Election Day. So obviously, there are a number of factors between tomorrow, next November, that could impact the election.
Right. And obviously we're seeing this dissonance in the Democratic Party, more liberal or more moderate, more conservative Democrats kind of calling each other out. One such a member, a Congressional Progressive Caucus chair, warning President Biden, quote, "The American people support the right for Israel to defend itself, to exist, but they do not support a war crime exchanged for another war crime." And she says, I think the president has to be careful about that. That was Representative Jayapal from the state of Washington. Do she and others believe that Israel should turn the other cheek?
I think from the perspective of a lot of progressive Democrats and progressives in general, people who are more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, to Palestinian liberation, they view this very differently from, more pro-Israel Democrats or pro-Israel voters in general. They see the bombardment of Gaza as a war crime. You hear the word genocide mentioned quite a bit, but that's more from their perspective. On the other side of this issue, there's the question of whenever Israel tries to defend itself, they get these terms thrown at them like war crime and genocide. So I think you're seeing two perspectives really emerge, particularly within the Democratic Party on this foreign policy issue. It's interesting, Adrienne, a few weeks ago, prior to the October 7th attacks, we were all talking about the divide within the Republican Party over funding for Ukraine. Well, I think in many ways, the war in the Middle East has unearthed the divide within the Democratic Party over the issue of Israel and Palestine.
Yes, and I think that what is interesting is you see people who are Jewish, who are more conservative, and others who are more progressive actually coming together right now at a time of unity. Even from what I've read online, people saying, I'm going to vote Republican next year because of what I believe these different candidates have to say about Israel. Do you think we might be surprised by how 2024 turns out as a result of this conflict?
You know, it's hard to say at this point because we are so far out and we know that foreign policy isn't necessarily a top priority for voters. I think if foreign policy, if this war were to impact the economy or, things back here at home to the point where it's impacting Americans in their day-to-day lives, we could certainly see things shift.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.